Let's start at the beginning, shall we? A time of chaos. A time in which order was a spectacle, and obedience was a mere dream to a higher being such as I. It was at this time that I called myself the Doctor. A pathetic title, but behind it was a promise, even a dream. The promise was to never be cruel and never be cowardly. But as I grew older, I realized that the promise was meaningless. And as I traversed the universe, I realized just how unfair it was. The dream, of course, was to explore, to see the universe rather than remain on my home planet. To traverse the stars and time itself. I didn't know it at the time, but the only way for the universe to survive was to rule it rather than travel within it. Both the promise and the dream were pathetic and wrong. Both died with my original title. And to save this universe, you have to do what others wouldn't dare. To rule this universe, you have to be cruel. Perhaps not cowardly. But to rule this universe, you have to become the Time Lord victorious. Donna, Martha, Rose, Anya, Gabby, Matthew, Wolfie, Heather. So many names that plague my memory. Meaningless names that were once something to me. And were names that I held dear and close to my hearts. A very long time ago. Now, as a ruler, I rarely have time to remember the people that I once deemed allies. There are occasionally days in which I believe I rule for them. And from what I remember, I crafted them into soldiers. And if that is the case, then perhaps people would be proud of me. Perhaps I'm unknowingly doing this in their names. Or perhaps they'd be disappointed in the decisions leading up to where I am now. In truth, I don't care anymore. My time with each and every one of my primitive companions was a waste of my now valuable time. They stifled my potential, and it was only when I decided to be truly alone that I began to prosper. If we were to start at the beginning of my reign, then it would be the sacrifice of Wilfred Mott. Now that's a name I do remember, and it's a name that haunts me alongside another name. The name Adelaide comes to mind occasionally, with the memory of what happened on Mars. As a ruler, I intend to forget all these names and useless memories, but being sentimental is an old habit of mine. As I watched Wilf die in front of me, I grew colder. I knew what I had to do. The burden of being Emperor was now bestowed upon me as I watched the life within him leave his eyes. It dawned on me how much time I'd given away to smaller, unimportant beings, compared to time I could have spent as this universe's saviour. As the winner. I walked away from that building and encountered Sylvia Noble, another useless ape with no meaning or purpose to be found. I couldn't look her in the eyes as she asked where her dad had gone to. I gave her a cold, blank stare, and in that moment she understood. She began hitting me as I walked towards the ship. I didn't explain to her what had happened to Wilf, but in that moment I felt nothing. The darkness within me was now who I had to be, to honour what Wilf sacrificed his life for. I got into my ship, and as I reached for the controls, I heard 4 knocks on the door. Sylvia was trying to enter, but nothing could get through those doors, lest I allow them to. It was at this point that I realised what the 4 knocks meant. A prophecy that told of my death, but what truly was the death of the Doctor and the rise of the Time Lord victorious. Can you hear me? He's back. It's all to do with Adric. The end of time itself. Altering our stories. He is risen.
That was lucky.
Wilf's death and my standoff with Rassilon taught me so many things. Such as how I used to see value in every life form. That was wrong. Or how I'm more valuable to this universe than any of them. As my rule continues, I feel no guilt for what happened that day. And as I look back on it, even now, I look at it with a sense of pride. I was right to do what I did. To stand there and look as they both took their own lives. Through the power of retrospective, I now see how small their lives were. Looking into the universe itself has shown me that everything I was, as a hero or a warrior, leads to nothing but meaningless death and destruction. At the very least, Wilf and Adelaide got meaningful deaths. Deaths that led to my rise. And deaths that have influenced me in ways that I don't think they truly knew. Anyways, enough about them. What other stories could I tell you? Perhaps that one time I saved the lost moon of Poosh from captivity by executing their captors. Or perhaps I could describe how I single-handedly destroyed every Dalek in existence by averting their creation.
I knew it was coming in the end, Doctor.
So many stories to tell, so little time. Time. I suppose I could tell you about the story of how I found the truth about time. My people never understood time as I do. They were too caught up in their own games and pitiful little time wars to truly see beyond what they already knew. They were extremely primitive and had no idea what power they had. Constantly changing and manipulating the mythology to make excuses as to why they can't use it. I truly found out what they were hiding, and when I went back to the beginning and looked at how our species truly began. This was a strictly forbidden time period according to Gallifreyan law, but as they're no longer around, I was always meaning to take a peek. It all began at the old times of Gallifrey. A time before mine. A time before Rassilon himself ruled over the planet. And a time in which Gallifrey was inhabited by a species deemed the Pythia. I witnessed their brutal slaughter as Rassilon launched an attack on the priesthood. Oh, is that what happened? When I went back in time to these events, I was exposed to the effects of time itself. Effects I should be used to, but for 1 second, I saw complete clarity. The first second of eternity. All of the alternate supposed timelines, all of the different conflicting legends throughout Gallifreyan history and my history were all one singular timeline. All of the conflicting events were coexisting in constant harmony. It almost looked as if it were a tree. The different events attached but branching off the timeline, dependent on one another. There were actual alternate timelines out in the distance. I'd describe them as separate trees from the same ground. It was all so fragile, beyond understanding, and yet it was clear to me, Time's champion. Perhaps a more fitting title would be Time's ruler. It was from then on that I knew that I had to protect time itself, as nobody else has the birthright that I do. I hold the sash of Rassilon within my arms as I speak, as a reminder of what was. I am the last of the Time Lords, and it is my duty to survive. All of Gallifreyan knowledge is within my mind, and it burns! It is a reminder of my destiny. The oath to do what others won't, and to rule as a leader, and not a doctor. I would no longer be so naive, so ignorant of my purpose, and so cowardly.
I'll never know if I was right.
Perhaps the next story I shall tell is one of how I rose to power initially. How I convinced the masses of the universe that I am no longer a renegade. It all began during my time in solitude. It was not long after I left Wilf to die, and it was in this time that I remained within my zero room. I was in a state of complete meditation as I trained my mind to distance itself from emotion and guilt. I struggled as my mind fought back, but I knew my strength and knew I was capable of winning, but in truth I knew deep down I would have to give myself more incentive. A reminder to make my mind vulnerable, and so I could fight back. Emotions were my weakness, and in turn I had to utilize that weakness to my advantage and overcome the sheer power of my own mind. I walked out of the zero room with a new purpose and headed towards the scanner. There were, at the very least, 1 billion unanswered distress calls. With every new distress call, another faded away, but I purposefully ignored them. Because now I had a new path to take. Even then I found it difficult, and decided to visit a location that I used to find meaningful, and perhaps would make me vulnerable. A time period in which one of my companions was sent hurtling to their deaths. It was a bad memory for over 500 years. It was a time that revealed to me just what I was as the Doctor. A plague bestowed on this universe.
That was lucky.
The dinosaurs. They were a useless and primitive species who contributed little to nothing to this universe. And their value is the same. They're nothing. So, where was I? Or when was I? Visiting the dinosaurs! A piece of alien technology had been calling out to my TARDIS from that period of time for some time. Some sort of device that was not from this universe, and in the wrong hands. I theorized it could fast-forward evolution in ways that I could barely imagine. As I was about to take it upon myself to rule this pitiful, broken universe, I had to start small. I knew it would be easy to eventually rule with someone of my reputation and my willingness to do what others won't. To stand victorious over all life for the better. And now I have brought peace, freedom, justice and security to my empire. No, wait. Sorry, that's Star Wars. Wait, hang on. Order has been restored, and entropy is no more.
That was lucky.
Covered in clay was something that belonged to the companion. A boy who I used to care for. He was like a son to me. It was alongside a Cyberman's helmet. It was also made of clay for unknown reasons that I wasn't interested in. But what I was interested in was the device. Was what the device reminded me of, and where I would go from here. This was the reason Wilf was destined to die, and it is the same reason that will lead me to my destiny. They both had to die to bring me here. It is only I that could save and rule this universe. Perhaps if I'd done it sooner, Wilf wouldn't have to die. And as I looked down upon the device, I realised that Adric wouldn't have had to die either. It was after finding the device, which was now unusable anyhow due to it rotting, that I began my takeover. That through becoming vulnerable, I crafted myself into what I am now. What I needed to be, and that is how I began my rule. I began spreading my propaganda throughout the universe, vanquishing foes with the sole intent of convincing people of my good nature that was no more. I began hypnotizing some deniers of my good intent and eventually landed the role of the universe's sole emperor. It was from then that I removed my mask and began to deem what is good, began to imprison and wipe evil, bar necessary evil, from the universe, sending my armies back in time to conquer and so much more. So much more! I have crafted an empire capable of challenging any threat, and the Eternals themselves. It is glorious. It is necessary, and my rule shall be eternal. This is my universe, and I stand victorious as its almighty ruler. I hold death, time, and life within my very hands. The laws of time are in my control. This is my right. This is my destiny. the destiny of my people who are long gone, and my rule shall be eternal. This is how I honor their memory. What a lovely palace you have here. You dare walk into my kingdom, as if it were my own? Well, I hate to break it to you, but I am your future. Well, kind of. Well, actually.
Oh, shut up! We are from alternative timelines, in which we took a similar route to you. And now, after my last plan failed, something is threatening all three of our timelines. And we need to band together.
If the timeline is at risk, then I reluctantly agree to band up with you two. But what exactly threatens time? Another future version of us, but he is far more powerful. Basically, what we're trying to say is, it'll take three of us to defeat him.
He goes by the title of the Emperor.